My name is Liam Whittington, and I am the Organisational Development Officer at the Forum. Joining me today is John Light, the Forum's Senior Director for Communications and Special Projects. How are you, John?
I'm well, Liam, thanks. I'm excited to be a part of this interview today. We're going to dig down into a key topic of multi-level governance with the help of two very special guests.
Yes, we're here at the University of Ottawa at the launch event for a new publication focusing on an issue which many academics and practitioners consider crucial to effective multi-level governance: fiscal equalization policies.
Indeed, Canada has a wealth of experience of developing and implementing policies to help redistribute resources between different levels of government equitably. The new book, Fiscal Federalism, an Equalization Policy in Canada, sheds light on these policies and the historical, political, and economic context which shaped their development.
And we are delighted to be joined by two of the authors of the book and distinguished international experts in Canadian fiscal federalism who have kindly agreed to speak to us today. We have, first of all, Professor André Lecours of the University of Ottawa. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, nice to be here with you guys.
And Professor Gregory Marchildon of the Institute of Health Policy, Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto. Welcome, Professor.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us. So, to begin with, could you please tell us a little about the role of fiscal federalism and equalization policies in multi-level governance systems? Why are they considered to be so important to the development of effective governance?
Well, I can speak to the equalization component more specifically. Most federal systems have equalization programs because typically when you decentralize political power, what federal systems do, you tend to accentuate the probability that the wealthier constituent units will be able to provide better services or services at a lesser level of taxation than others. So to tackle this issue, which is really one of equity and solidarity and federation, most federal systems put together some horizontal redistribution scheme, and that's what we have here in the form of the Canadian equalization system.
And then on the spending side, you have two large transfers. One is called the Canada Health Transfer, the other the Canada Social Transfer. And the purpose of these transfers is to also to redistribute, to take federal revenues and to provide them on equal amounts, on per capita amounts to each province, so they can afford to deliver what are in fact quite expensive programs, including universal health coverage for hospital, diagnostic, medical care services, as well as a very extensive post-secondary system of education, as well as fairly extensive social assistance systems.
Now that's really interesting. So has Canada's transfer policy and equalization policy been positive for the political process, or has it made governance more challenging?
Well, with equalization in particular, there have been some stretches where the program has been particularly contentious. I think overall it's fair to say that there are critics to the equalization program in Canada, especially from provinces that are not typically recipient of equalization. But overall, I would say that the equalization program has remained fairly immune to a degree to high levels of politicization, but it has happened that there's been such politicization which has led to intergovernmental conflict. That's an issue that we tackle in the book. So there are ways we suggest could be considered to eliminate the inherent potential of politicization of the equalization program in Canada.
I think that equalization has also operated in a way that's fairly silent, in that it has removed the need for certain provincial governments to be constantly asking for or trying to negotiate arrangements for direct transfers or for bailouts at certain times when they're in difficulties. So in that sense, I think it's had a positive impact. And when you combine that with the other transfers, the Canada Health Transfer and the Canada Social Transfer, even though these two have been subject to the occasional political dispute and standoff between provincial and the federal government, I think it's actually surprising in some ways that there have been not as many disputes between among provincial governments as you would expect over sort of the justification for these programs and the need for these programs.
And given the challenges that have accompanied the politicization of the transfer and equalization policy, what would you identify as the most successful components of the transfer and equalization policy?
Well, I would say that I think in the end, the program has allowed smaller provinces, provinces that historically were poor, to since 1957 to deliver public services of good quality. And the counterfactuals are difficult here. We can't really do as if there was a Canada without equalization, but I think there's certainly enough anecdotal evidence to suggest that provinces who depend greatly on equalization for their budget, the New Brunswick, for example, Prince Edward Island, there's enough anecdotal evidence at least to suggest that equalization has made a difference in the life of the residents of these provinces.
I agree completely, Andre, and I would say that when you go to the conditional transfers, because equalization is an unconditional transfer, it raises the tax capacity of those provinces that wouldn't ordinarily be able to afford such programs. When you get into the Canada Health Transfer and Canada Social Transfer, that really allows these governments to provide services of roughly comparable quality at comparable tax rates. So in a sense, it's an assist to equalization, and in combination, they allow us to achieve this national purpose, allow us to have programs that have some national standards and to ensure that those national standards are enforced, even though the provincial programs are entirely administered and delivered at a provincial level.
So, does your book, it's a great analysis, by the way, it was a great event today, does this book, does it provide any suggestions as to how Canada's equalization and transfer policy might be improved?
Well, on equalization, what we recommend is simply to consider some other governance models, and one that we discuss in some length is the Australian model, where there's a quasi, an arm's length agency which makes decisions on equalization payments, and I think it has the virtue, at least in Australia, to really almost completely depoliticize the process. Now, we're not saying that the same outcome would be necessarily automatic in Canada, but that might be one way to govern equalization differently. Now, there's critics to that position. Of course, the federal government in equalization has one of the few leverages, arguably, that it still completely owns in terms of shaping solidarity and redistribution in Canada. But again, we believe that there would be some merit, or there would be something interesting in having an arm's length agency being central to the governance of the equalization program.
The only other area of reform I might mention is that over time the size of the transfers has diminished, particularly equalization, in real terms, inflation-adjusted terms. And there are a couple different ways, when you look at it from a systems perspective, that this could be addressed. One of them is to increase the pool of equalization at some point, perhaps in this upcoming negotiation over equalization and discussion. In the next cycle. The next way is to perhaps change the way in which the formula for the Canada Health Transfer has been designed to ensure that provinces that have older populations, more remote communities, might get just a little bit more than other provinces in order that they can contend with these higher cost factors.
That's very interesting. And finally, given your analysis of Canada's fiscal equalization policy, would you identify any specific or particular modern political or events or dynamics that have precipitated the most significant change to fiscal federalism policy and the transfer system in Canada?
Well, I think transformation in the Canadian political economy is one. Obviously, there's been a major manufacturing crisis in Ontario, which has changed, has led to some fairly important changes in the program. I think historically, the volatility in the price of oil has led to many different adjustments to the program. So I think those are the types of factors that have been most apparent to me, at least, in shaping shaping the kind of the contours of the program.
And in looking ahead, I think that perhaps one of the biggest shifts could be the decline of fossil fuels completely, and that will change the complexion of the country quite a bit if this comes to be, and there's certainly a fair amount of evidence that it could be. We seem to be going through a bit of a revolution, and this is something that over the next 10 to 20 years, and there might have to be a recasting of equalization to deal with that fundamental change.
Gentlemen, thank you. To our viewers, we'd like to thank our special guests, Professor Andre Lecours and Professor Greg Marchildon, for providing us with their expert perspectives on this topic, which clearly plays a significant role in Canada's federal system. The new book, Fiscal Federalism and Equalization Policy in Canada, Political and Economic Dimensions, by Andre Lecours, Daniel Beland, Gregory Marchildon, Haizhen Mou, and Rose Olfert, is published by the University of Toronto Press, and you can get a copy through the University of Toronto.
Thanks again to our guests. If you would like to know more about fiscal federalism or other multi-level governance issues, you can find the Forum of Federations, the global network on federalism and devolved governance, on Facebook, Twitter, and at our website, forumfed.org. Thanks for watching.